My sister, Ashley, did not invite me to her wedding, but she went ahead and invited all of my friends. So, as a bit of payback for leaving me out, my friends decided to show up in the most outrageous outfits they could find. It was like they were making a point on my behalf. Let me tell you, this kind of thing has been a long time coming, considering how Ashley and I grew up. As the older sibling, I was always expected to take care of Ashley. From the time we were kids, my parents laid it on thick that I had to clean up after her, help her with her homework, walk her home from school, and even entertain her when she was bored because they were always too busy with their jobs. My mom, especially, would come home from work, exhausted, and say she just did not have the energy to spend time with Ashley. Then she would hand me a book and tell me to read Ashley a bedtime story. Ashley never made my life easy, though. She was the kind of kid who would blurt out rude things and never seemed to understand when she had crossed a line. I could not count the number of times her behavior landed me in awkward situations. Take one of my best friend Sarah's birthdays, for instance. It was her 13th, and we had all pooled together our allowance to buy her some gifts. Sarah's grandparents sent her this beautiful Barbie dollhouse, and even though we were getting a little old for dolls, Sarah cherished it. She got emotional opening it, which made it clear how much the gift meant to her. Out of nowhere, Ashley started laughing. When everyone turned to look at her, she sneered and said, "What a dumb gift." I was horrified, and Sarah looked crushed. I quickly apologized to Sarah and took Ashley home. When I confronted her later and asked why she said such a hurtful thing, she shrugged and said she was just being honest, like it was no big deal. I was furious and disappointed, but my parents? They did not back me up. They told me I should be more understanding of Ashley and stop worrying so much about what other people thought. Looking back now, I realize how much my parents let Ashley get away with. They always made excuses for her behavior and put all the responsibility on me to deal with her. As I grew older, I started pushing back. I told them flat out that Ashley needed to make her own friends and stop tagging along with me all the time. My parents thought I was being selfish, but I knew I needed my own space. It was not my fault Ashley had trouble making friends. She drove people away with her rude remarks and lack of social awareness. By the time we got to high school, Ashley was sitting alone at lunch because no one wanted to be around her. Of course, my parents decided the solution was to force me to include her in my friend group. I hated it, but they would not stop lecturing me until I gave in. My friends tolerated her because of me, but I could tell they were not happy about it. When I finally went to college, it felt like I could breathe for the first time. My parents wanted me to stay close to home, but I worked hard, got a scholarship, and ended up at a university hundreds of miles away. My mom begged me to reconsider, saying Ashley would miss me, but I knew this was my chance to start fresh. I moved into my dorm and never looked back. I was so happy to be free from the constant pressure that I even skipped going home for holidays and long weekends. Ashley and I barely stayed in touch after that. We were part of an old Facebook group with some mutual friends from school, but that was about it. Ashley would sometimes post messages asking if anyone wanted to hang out, but no one ever responded. She would even call some of my friends directly, but they would either make excuses or ignore her. I could not blame them, they only put up with her because of me, and now that I was not around, they had no reason to. During my final year of college, I went home for a school reunion. I was excited to see my old friends and catch up. Ashley, of course, wanted to come along. She said it would be fun to see everyone again, but I stood my ground this time. I told her this was my event, not hers, and she needed to find her own group of friends. My parents, predictably, tried to guilt-trip me, but I refused to budge. I thought that would be the end of it, but boy, was I wrong. During the reunion, I was swept up in a wave of nostalgia. The laughter, the old stories, the jokes that only made sense to us, it all felt like stepping back in time. I was having such a great time reconnecting with everyone, completely immersed in the moment. Then, as my friends and I sat down for lunch, the last person I expected to see barged into the restaurant, my sister, Jessica. I froze. Jessica was the last person I wanted to see. I had made it crystal clear that she was not welcome, but there she was, standing at the table as though she belonged there. Before I could even process what was happening, she grinned broadly and announced, "Oh, I missed you guys so much." The table fell silent. Everyone glanced around awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. Jessica, seemingly oblivious to the tension, pulled up a chair and started talking about how long it had been since she had seen everyone. My friends tried to be polite, but I could see the discomfort written all over their faces. No one could speak freely with her there, and it felt like the entire vibe of the reunion had shifted. I was furious. After lunch, I pulled Jessica aside and told her she needed to leave. She just shrugged and said I was overreacting, that this was not a big deal, and that these were her friends too. Her dismissive attitude was the last straw for me. I decided that if she was not going to understand boundaries privately, maybe addressing it in front of others would finally make her get it. I brought her back to the group and asked my friends directly if they felt it was appropriate for Jessica to crash our reunion uninvited. To my relief, a few of them admitted they felt uncomfortable and that they were not particularly close to her. One of my best friends, Samantha, tried to soften the blow by suggesting they could hang out with Jessica some other day, but for today, it should just be the classmates. Jessica looked mortified. She shot me a glare that could have burned through steel before storming out of the restaurant. Honestly, I felt a bit vindicated. She needed to understand boundaries, and this was a hard lesson for her. But the fallout came quickly. That evening, my parents cornered me at home and demanded to know why I had embarrassed Jessica in front of everyone. I explained that she had no business being there in the first place, but they would not listen. They kept insisting that I should have been more understanding and that Jessica was just trying to connect with people. I reminded them how I had spent years being understanding, but the truth was, those people were only kind to her because of me. If they truly wanted to be her friends, why had none of them reached out to her in all this time? Jessica, who must have overheard our argument, barged into the room and insisted everyone liked her and that I was trying to turn them against her. I could not help but laugh. If they liked you so much, why has no one answered your messages or calls for years? I asked her. That shut her up, but my parents turned on me, calling me selfish and demanding I apologize to her. I stood my ground. Jessica had crossed a boundary, and it was time she faced the consequences. That incident was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. We stopped speaking entirely after that, even when we ran into each other during holidays. We were like strangers under the same roof. Fast forward to when I was planning my wedding. My parents insisted I invite Jessica, saying it would look bad if the family knew there was a rift. Reluctantly, I agreed, but when they pushed for her to be my bridesmaid, I drew a firm line. I told them I would uninvite her altogether if they kept pressing the issue. Thankfully, my husband, Brian, understood where I was coming from and supported my decision. Jessica attended as a guest, but we barely exchanged a word. Over time, we maintained a polite but distant relationship. Now, coming to the current incident, Jessica got married last week. Her husband, David, is 15 years older than her, and they met while she was working at a diner. Jessica has always struggled to hold a job, and for years, she would tell our parents how badly she wanted to get married. David was her knight in shining armor, and she was over the moon about finally tying the knot. When the invitations went out, I was not surprised to be left off the list. Honestly, I did not care much. We were not close, and I was not expecting an invite. What did shock me was when I learned that Jessica had sent virtual invitations to all my friends. This was the same Facebook group where I had added her years ago, back when my parents forced me to include her in everything. Most of us barely used Facebook anymore, so I had forgotten the group even existed. When some of my friends reached out to ask if I was attending, they were stunned to hear that I had not been invited. I told them it was fine and that they could go if they wanted, but the news must have spread quickly. Soon, I started getting messages from friends saying how rude it was for Jessica to invite them while excluding me. I spoke to my parents about it, reminding them how they had pressured me to include Jessica in my wedding, but they brushed it off, saying it was Jessica's guest list and her choice. They even tried to justify it by saying those were her friends too and that she would love for them to attend. At that point, I realized there was no point in arguing. I let it go and decided not to bring it up again. On the day of Jessica's wedding, Brian, our son, and I spent the day at the beach. It was a much-needed escape. I turned my phone off, enjoying a tech-free day with my family. When we got home, I turned my phone back on and was bombarded with messages and calls from Jessica and my parents. Confused, I opened the most recent message from Jessica. It included a photo and a furious caption blaming me for ruining her wedding. She wrote that it was entirely my fault and that she would never forgive me for ruining her special day. Attached to her message was a photo that left me speechless. It was a picture of some of my friends at the wedding, dressed in floor-length, multicolored gowns that looked absolutely absurd. One of them was draped in a flashy feather boa, and another was wearing a summer hat that seemed more suited for a picnic than a wedding. The scene in the photo resembled a costume party rather than a formal celebration. I could not help but chuckle at how ridiculous they looked, though I knew this was bound to cause trouble. A few minutes later, my sister Jessica called. She had clearly been trying to reach me all day. As soon as I picked up, she unleashed a tirade, accusing me of sabotaging her wedding. She screamed about how selfish I was and how I must have told my friends to dress that way just to humiliate her. I tried to calm her down, explaining that I had no idea why they had chosen those outfits. But she would not listen and kept insisting that I was jealous and had deliberately orchestrated this disaster. I felt a twinge of guilt for her hurt feelings, but I genuinely did not understand why she thought I was behind this. My parents soon joined the chorus of blame, texting me about how disappointed they were and how I should have stopped my friends from wearing such inappropriate outfits. Their accusations were outrageous. How could I have controlled what my friends wore, especially when I had not even been invited to the wedding? Still, I started to wonder if my friends had done this as a form of protest because they knew Jessica had excluded me. I began questioning whether I should have clarified things better to them to avoid this whole mess. Update 1. After discussing it with Brian, we both agreed that I needed to clear the air with my friends first before addressing the situation with my family. By this point, photos from Jessica's wedding were all over social media, and the incident had become something of a talking point. I organized a video call with my friends to ask them directly why they had chosen such outlandish outfits. To my surprise, they admitted outright that it was a deliberate choice. They said they were tired of Jessica's constant attempts to force herself into situations where she was not welcome. Over the years, they had seen how Jessica intruded on events and even badmouthed me behind my back. While they had tolerated her before because of me, they had grown increasingly frustrated. Learning that she had excluded me from her wedding while inviting them was the final straw. They decided to use their attire as a subtle protest and to make it clear that they did not consider her a friend. Hearing this, I felt a mixture of relief and awkwardness. My friends were apologetic for putting me in a tough spot, and they offered to send Jessica a message explaining that the decision to dress that way had been entirely their own. They wanted to make it clear that I had no involvement in their plans. I appreciated their support and told them that while their actions had caused a bit of chaos, I understood where they were coming from. My main concern was ensuring Jessica and my parents understood the truth so I would not continue to be blamed. True to their word, my friends sent Jessica a group message in our old Facebook chat, apologizing and explaining that their choice of clothing had been their own idea. Despite seeing this message, Jessica called me again, furious. She accused me of manipulating my friends and trying to escape responsibility. She yelled about how her wedding had become a joke within the family and how those pictures of my friends were spreading online. I stayed calm and told her that I could not be held accountable for what my friends wore, especially since I was not even at the wedding. I reminded her that my friends had taken responsibility and admitted that I had no part in their decision. Still, Jessica refused to believe me. It became clear that she was unwilling to accept any explanation that did not fit her narrative, so I politely ended the call. Brian suggested that my parents might be able to mediate, but I doubted it. Jessica seemed determined to pin the blame on me, and I did not think my parents would side with me over her. Regardless, I decided I would speak to them that weekend to see if they could help resolve the situation. Update 2. A week later, I sat down with my parents to explain everything. Unfortunately, the conversation went exactly as I expected. It only made things worse. As I tried to clarify what had happened, they cut me off with accusations. They said I should have controlled my friends, as if I had any say in their choices. They suggested that I should have warned Jessica, even though I had no idea what my friends were planning. I was dumbfounded. I told them that I had not been part of my friends' discussions and that they had acted entirely on their own. But, much like Jessica, my parents refused to believe me. Their unwavering bias toward Jessica made it clear that they were not interested in hearing my side of the story. Frustrated, I realized that resolving this situation with them might be impossible. Brian, who had come with me for moral support, stepped in to defend me. He calmly explained that I had no knowledge of my friend's intentions and reminded them that I had not even been invited to the wedding. He pointed out how unfair it was for them to blame me without evidence. My mother, however, insisted that I must have encouraged my friends somehow. At that point, I knew it was a losing battle. I told my parents that I was done trying to explain myself and that if they chose not to believe me, there was no point in continuing the conversation. I also told them that I was tired of being the scapegoat in this family and that I had decided to cut ties with Jessica for good. My mother protested, but my father surprisingly held her back. As Brian and I left their house, I felt a mix of anger and relief. It was clear that my parents were not going to see things from my perspective, but I no longer felt the need to try and convince them. I decided to focus on the people who truly supported me and let go of those who refused to respect my boundaries. Brian, who had come with me for this discussion, decided he had heard enough and stood up for me. He looked my parents straight in the eye and said, "Listen, she is not the kind of person to go behind someone's back, especially not her own sister." On the day of Jessica's wedding, we were out having a family day because, guess what? We were not even invited. We had no clue what was going on, so how could she possibly have anything to do with it? He spoke with such calm conviction that, for a moment, I thought my parents might actually consider his words. But my mother, stubborn as ever, protested. "How do you know she did not say something to her friends? She might have made a comment, and they took it too far." Brian did not back down. He replied, "She told her friends she was okay with not being invited and left it at that. What they chose to do was entirely on them. You cannot blame her for something she had no control over." I could see my parents were not going to budge. Frustrated but resolute, I told them, "If you are not willing to believe me, then this conversation is over. I am done explaining myself. For years, I have carried the burden of taking care of Jessica, cleaning up her messes, and being your scapegoat. I am not doing it anymore." I went on to tell them that I had made the decision to cut Jessica out of my life for good. My mother started to object, but my father, to my surprise, stopped her. With that, Brian and I left their house. I hoped that once their emotions cooled down, they might be willing to see the truth. But as the weeks passed with no word from them, I realized they were choosing to stand by Jessica, even at the cost of our relationship. It hurts to see how blatantly they favor her, even though I was the one who always helped her and sacrificed so much for our family. Still, I have made peace with the fact that I cannot change their minds. If this is the choice they are making, I have to respect it, even if it is disappointing. For now, I have blocked Jessica and plan to keep it that way indefinitely. Update 3. It has been 5 months since I last wrote, and a lot has changed. First of all, I started therapy. So many of you encouraged me to do it, and I finally took the plunge. Let me tell you, it has been life-changing. Therapy has helped me unpack so much of the trauma from my childhood, and for the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. I feel lighter, more confident, and validated in my decision to stand up for myself. As for the fallout from Jessica's wedding, my parents did reach out a few times over the months. But instead of addressing the situation or apologizing for the way they treated me, they acted like nothing had happened. It quickly became clear that their attempts to reconnect were not about me but about gaining access to my son, their only grandchild. That realization solidified my decision to cut them off too. I will not let them have the chance to treat my child the way they treated me. Brian and I have been focusing on building a happy and healthy life for our little family. He has been my rock through all of this, and I cannot say enough good things about him. He supported me when I decided to cut ties with my parents, and he has never made me feel like I was handling this alone. We are planning a much-needed family vacation with our son soon, and I cannot wait to create new, joyful memories with the people who truly matter to me. If there is one thing I have learned through this ordeal, it is that sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from toxic relationships. Life is too short to let someone else's negativity drag you down. If you are dealing with a family member who brings nothing but pain and chaos into your life, please, for the sake of your mental health, let them go. It will not be easy, but it is worth it. You deserve to be surrounded by people who love you for who you are.